time ago. My son likes to tease me. It was after the dinosaurs were extinct, but it was a few years back.
Barely.
Just barely. To kind of humbly go through this journey to see how can I do a better job serving.
I feel like it's been one of my greatest strengths because I'm not indoctrinated with 3 decades of bad learning.
And I'm really excited. You know, people expect we'll talk about people who are nearing retirement. Yeah, we'll talk about all that stuff.
Yep.
But I can't wait to talk about too, here, families. Here's what you can do with your little ones, your grandkids, your children. Well, welcome to the maiden voyage of the Legacy Life podcast. I'm Ryan.
I'm Caleb.
And we're excited to be here with you today. Just to start out in this podcast here, we're just going to have a conversation about why we're even here and why we're doing this and what we're hoping the value that you as the listener is going to get out of what we're doing here. So Caleb, I know you've got a list of a ton of questions that you want to ask.
I do.
And just to kind of give you a little background here, I mean, Caleb and I have started this journey. I started my journey in this industry a long time ago. My son likes to tease me. It was after the dinosaurs were extinct, but it was a few years back. Just barely.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I started back in 2008 in this industry and have been working with families since then. And my son has come on board here in the last couple of years to come alongside and work in the family business here at Legacy Life Financial. And so we're just going to kind of get into some of the ins and outs and the whys and the whats and the hows of what we do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I first want to start out because I want to preface like the whole point of this whole thing that we're doing here is like, what was the heart behind starting this sort of medium for communicating with people about finance, but not only finance, but legacy and what it means to leave a lasting legacy in different ways you can do that. And it's not just financial. It's not just monetarily. You can do it in all sorts of ways. And then how does faith tie into that? So sort of the background there, like what was the heart behind doing this? And then bringing me on as well as a younger voice, you could say.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for me, growing up, you're not really taught a lot, in school and when you're being educated, they don't really talk a lot about money and investing and, how to do all that. And so there was kind of a big blank inside of me. And I think a lot of people in my generation, and, I made a lot of mistakes when I was younger. And as I began to learn more about money and how it could be used as a resource and how it can benefit people, I began to see that not only was it helping me change, but there was a lot of need around me for people to get that same kind of education. And so I wanted to be able to talk to people and help educate them, to be able to open their eyes and their minds to different possibilities of what could be possible, what would be possible for their families, for their futures, their children, and so forth. And that's been quite a journey.
Yeah.
But to your point too, that the money itself, it's not just about numbers, it's about people. It's about the values that accompany the use of those resources that you're given and the impact, like you said, that is possible that you can leave behind.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, it's very true. Yeah. So, I think one thing that has always stuck out to me that you've always said, and I've heard this from other people as well, that like, why can't I think about my future generations when I'm making decisions today, not only like financially, but just how you live your life and the things you set up and the habits you have and, what you do, making a podcast, starting a business, all these things. And I think about that often, like every decision I make today doesn't just affect me, it affects those around me, but then it also affects those that I've not yet met in my future generations.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm thinking like, okay, that changes your entire perspective of how you look at things financially for sure, but also just how you carry yourself in life. And so I guess to kind of like go off of your point, you're talking a little bit more about financially, but like from today in your perspective, what does it mean to leave an actual lasting legacy for your children and your community and those that you're in contact with?
Right. I think a good analogy or a word picture you can kind of put with that is something real simple. As a kid, I loved to skip stones on the water. You find these flat stones and you throw them, especially living in Michigan. You have a lot of water to do that and a lot of nice flat stones on the beach. But when you throw a stone in the water, and you wake up, especially in the morning, if it's just a still lake and it's just like the water looks like glass, you throw a stone in the water and it breaks that pattern. It makes these ripples that go out. And I think the one thing that we need to realize is that we don't realize how many people we actually impact by just being here and being alive. That we are like a stone being thrown in the water, and that ripple effect goes out, and it's going to affect a lot more people than I think we realize. And so when I think of legacy, it's kind of like, what do I want my splash in the water to create? What kind of a ripple effect do I want it to create? And that causes you, like you said, to really be more thoughtful, more intentional with the decisions you make on a daily basis, especially when you think about your future. Because like you said, why, if I think about, in our family, we have 4 children. And if you all have children, 5 generations from now, how many people might that represent? And what I tell you, or what ripple effect I have in you today, is going to affect your son or daughter. And then if you sow that into them, right? How many years ahead am I actually impacting by what I do today? It's actually going to reach a lot farther than me, and that I understand. And so that makes our choices important. It also makes it exciting and powerful, because it really kind of gives you the understanding that what a responsibility we have, but also an opportunity to really create things that people will remember and benefit them for years to come. That's how we make change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I saw something the other day, must have been on social media or something, kind of showing my age there. But it said, like, each generation you go back, the amount of people it takes to make like me happen grows exponentially. Like, you need two sets of grandparents, and then they both need 2 sets of grandparents.
Right.
I think it's, if you go back like 10, I'm probably wrong on this, but like 10 generations, like, to that, the fact that I'm possible took like over 4,000 people like meeting,
right,
and having children, and then them meeting and having children.
Right.
And
we should actually find the real stats on that, and maybe
Yeah.
talk about that in a future episode, because that is the kind of reverse engineered what we just talked about.
Yeah.
We talked about looking ahead,
Right.
but you look back and realize what a miracle it is that we're actually even here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And have the opportunity to live.
Yeah. No, it's pretty incredible.
It is.
Moving on a little bit. So, when it comes to finance, I know for me, I was blessed to grow up in, the culture where, like, you were very open about finance and wanted to teach us about finance. And again, while I was growing up, you were still learning a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
So, like, I was kind of learning with you, because us kids were almost like your guinea pigs sometimes. You're like, like you discovered, we'll probably talk about it, the 5 jars at some point.
Yeah.
And you were like, all right, we're going to do this, right? And turns out it's a very helpful thing to do.
Right.
But when it comes to finance, I feel like there's not a lot of transparency when people talk about it, when it's educated, especially in our like industry or like field, it feels very salesy. It feels very like in your face, like, you need this and my option's the only good option, and I'm just going to try to convince you why. There's not a whole lot of education. I feel like good education, transparent education. And so I mean, I know I've noticed this, and from pretty much every person we've talked to in the last 1.5 to 2 years, they've all pretty much had the same general consensus that they've not been educated well.
Yeah.
And so I guess I want to hear your perspective on that. You being a little bit more well-versed, you've been in the industry for quite a long while.
Yeah.
What are some of your thoughts on that? And
yeah, I think, boy, that's a great question. A couple of great questions in there. I guess starting up high and kind of maybe breaking into some practicals.
Sure.
From a high level, having the realization that, if you want to call it financial planning, or the people we're talking to wanting to have a plan, is in many ways broken in our industry because of a lot of the things that you mentioned, the way people they feel. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But one is, I know for certain is because one issue people are having is they're finding it difficult to verify the information they're being given when it comes to their financial plan. They're told, like you said, here's the strategy you should use. And they're told, you're going to make X amount, or right. But it's hard for them to verify to know why it works that way, or if that's even true, if that's really what's going to happen. And so being able to plan with people and giving them tools so they can actually verify what they're hearing, to actually see what the results are really going to look like, I think is really important. In that, the transparency, like here at Legacy Life, we live in a glass house. Come in and take a look. We'll show you anything you want to see. And so I know that is part of the issue. The other is that in the industry itself, I really think that in many places, not in all places, there are good advisors out there.
Yeah, I was just about to say just in my experience thus far,
Mm-hmm.
It's been very encouraging. There's a lot of little pockets of people
Mm-hmm.
that have like the same culture and mentality of like transparency and education first.
Yes.
Like we're here to serve people.
Mm-hmm.
We're not here to make a sale.
Correct.
And so I think it's encouraging seeing like there are people out there that think this way.
Yeah.
But in general, I feel like just the way that we'll share some of your stories and how you were taught coming up into this business, it's very common to be taught almost the opposite of what is actually best served for people.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. There, I think that many places in this business profit off of the ability to make it seem that financial planning and retirement is confusing, intimidating, can cause a lot of anxiety. And I think people feel that. And I think that in many places, that's how they make the sale, is by selling complexity rather than good advice and transparency. Mm. And that creates that anxiousness, I think, in people, or that, they throw their hands up, I can't do this, right? Where we really feel and believe that we can empower people where, they may find out they don't even need us, but we may be able to help them know that, hey, you can do this plan on your own. You may not even need our help because this is the situation you're in. And if that's the case, great. As long as people are empowered to be able to take their future and their legacy forward and feel confident in what they're doing, that's what's most important, that they can attach themselves to the plan. Which brings up another great point about the planning process itself, which we can get into at some point, maybe a future episode or whatnot. That's where it gets real exciting, is the planning process, doing it with them instead of for them. And I think that transparency is where you're really able to build the trust necessary to build that relational capacity with people, where they actually really feel like you're walking with them through their journey to what they're trying to accomplish for themselves and their families and their generations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we can redirect if you want to, but I'm curious, and I feel like it's a good story of how you got to where you are today, doing what you're doing today. Mm-hmm. Like, give a little background as to like where you started, like how you were taught in the beginning, kind of how you were refashioned, and
okay, so it's kind of an interesting journey. Well, to start, and maybe I'm going too far back here, but when I was real little, I always remember growing up, and I was always fascinated by numbers. Yet I wouldn't say I was the best algebra student in the world, but I was always fascinated more when it came to numbers. I was more fascinated by the game of Monopoly. Mm-hmm. And you were playing the game and you were buying property and you were collecting rent from people and you were buying and selling and you were trying to create something called wealth, right? To win the game, right? And I always remember, admittedly, I'd come home at night, I'd be in my bedroom, I'd be doing my homework from school or whatnot, and I'd often get distracted by thoughts of I wonder what it'd be like to own a piece of property one day, or to start a business, or I'd be think these thoughts and these I don't know, what do you call it when you daydream? These daydreams about that, and I always thought, growing up, I'm like, well, then I heard about the financial world and something called a stockbroker, and well, what's a stock? So I'd be real curious and I'd be reading about it. And so I always grew up and thought, oh, I'm going to do that someday. And then kind of, it was a turn of events. My life kind of took on a different direction initially. You know, I actually worked in ministry for about 10 years. When I got out of high school and out of college, I was working in various churches as a youth pastor and worked with young people, and very rewarding work. It's some of my favorite memories of life is working with those young people and learning the other side, I guess, of legacy and of relationships. And the other part of wealth building is in your relational capacity with people and giving them other tools and things for life outside of just the monetary. But as that went on, I started moving out of that, as you know, got married, started having kids, started moving out of the youth pastor role, started moving into more business type oriented ventures, and learning that, you know, the kingdom of God was bigger than just church life. That it's everywhere, and starting to begin to learn slowly and painfully how to bring those tools into a business environment, and that mentality. And that eventually led me into 2008 of looking at a career change and having, you know, your mother come to me and say, you know what, I found this thing online for people who actually help retirees plan for retirement. You've always loved numbers. You've always loved the idea of investing. You should take a look at this. And so I did. And that started me on the journey to learning how to work with people, starting at kitchen tables all the way up to building my own practice today. And it's been the greatest journey of my life.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
That's a great year to start a new career.
Yeah. 2008. Perfect year.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Did I answer your question, or was there more detail?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I'm sure as we go on, you'll get into a little bit more details, some stories and stuff.
Absolutely.
But that's a pretty good start. So, you know, as far as like, we really want you guys to get a good grasp of like what we're doing here, and, you know, like what our goal here is. So you know what you're getting into, but,
Yep.
But, you know, some of the like core values that we really want to instate in this, you know, like when people say you're starting a business or whatever, you want to have your core values. And I feel like it's a pretty good thing to, you know, set in stone, set in place, because then everyone can be on the same page. So you, the listeners, my dad and I, any guests that we have on the show in the future, we all want to be on the same page.
Correct.
Two of the top ones that we've been talking about for the last little bit here is transparency and education, I would say, are two really big ones.
Yeah.
And then a third one is, this might not always come up, but I think it's one of the most important things you can talk about, is how faith, you know, interweaves, or how faith like connects with this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so I guess I'm curious from your standpoint, because I'm not sure I've thought out a good, I guess, conclusion to this question. Still kind of like studying it and trying to figure this out for myself. So I'm curious what your thoughts are. But how has faith in the past, and maybe for some people that aren't necessarily like believers, like maybe by their faith or however they like see it, you're like, how has faith in the past like dictated or encouraged your financial decisions and planning? And how has that turned out in the future? Like, going into a decision with faith, and then what came out on the other end?
Right. Yeah. So faith, you know, for us, you know, when it comes to faith, it really changes your paradigm of how your relationship to money, from a me focused to an other focused. It's not about ownership anymore in terms of like what I feel I own, but rather what am I stewarding? Like I would my language began to change from one of ownership to stewardship. And again, that's how we look at it, that I'm actually just taking care of someone else's resources, or I'm partnering with someone else's resources to do my best job to take care of them. And to learn, even through our mistakes, how to do a better job next time. And, you know, so it was a mindset of a lot of mercy, being willing to learn, being willing to kind of humbly go through this journey to see how can I do a better job serving and stewarding. And then it also begins to translate into an element of how to be generous. And so it changes, your paradigm from one of like personal ownership to generosity as well. What does that look like? How is integrity in your generosity? How does that all work? And then, which then accompanies the other word that I'm really taking responsibility for what's been entrusted and how can we make it larger? It was that parable of the talents where, the master says, here's 5, here's 1, 5, and 10, and go do something with it. Right. And he goes away on a journey, and, one person takes the 5 and makes 10, the 10 makes 20, right? They multiply, and one buried it. Right. And when the master returns and says, hey, okay, let's see, let's set up accounts here, he was really pleased with the fact that they had taken those resources and multiplied them. And so there's that's the last element, the multiplication effect, that it's a good thing to want to multiply that which you've been given. That's actually a very good thing to want to do. And then it's just the why behind it that becomes the most important. What's the motivation that drives the multiplication?
Yeah.
Yeah.
True. Yeah. And we'll be talking about multiplication of money.
Yes, we will. Yes, we will.
Hint, hint.
Yep, for sure.
Yep. Okay, I've kind of been talking a lot and asking a lot of questions. I'm curious if you have anything that you want to get into or have any questions or anything like that.
Yeah, I do. So like now that you've been, kind of walking alongside and doing very well and developing into this career, what are some of the things as a person from your generation that maybe your top highlights, top 2 or 3 highlights, however you want to answer it, that you're taking from what you've learned so far in this, and what it's opened your mind to seeing in terms of like your vision for life, and what you're hoping to be able to provide, as you kind of go through this.
Yeah. I'd say I've already been talking about it a lot, but for somebody, my perspective, my generation, my age, I feel like we've grown up with so much information being thrown at us.
Sure.
And we don't really know what's true. Like we crave honesty and genuine connection and transparency, like we were just talking about, And so I guess like coming into this at a younger age than most people would do. Like what's the average age of somebody as like a financial advisor?
I think in our industry, the average age of like an insurance producer, it was about 57 or 58 years old.
Right. So I'm about 3 decades younger than the average age in this industry. And, some people could see that as a like hindrance, like, okay, who am I to trust a younger person doing this? And sure, some people might have that preconceived notion when they go into a conversation with me, and that's fine. But I feel like it's been one of my greatest strengths because I'm not indoctrinated with 3 decades of bad learning, and I'm like learning the right way right off the bat. And I don't have any I don't have as much life experience. I have life experience, but I don't have as much life experience that kind of taints my view of like finance and how to manage it and all these different things. I can really come into it with an open mind and look at all of the options and like what will actually best fit this person. And I can ask a lot of questions. God's blessed me with a lot of good people that, are extremely gifted in this area and have a lot of great insight and that don't push me to make a decision, but just, again, educate me and then let me make my own decision, come to my own conclusion. I'm reading this book right now that Paul had actually suggested to us, or maybe he did, one of the guys in the group did, called The Psychology of Money.
Yeah.
And I don't agree with everything the guy says in the book, right? But there's some really good pieces. And one of the good pieces right in the beginning is how he says, it's almost dumb luck how each person in the world sees money and their finances, because history itself isn't necessarily enough to teach somebody the lesson. They kind of have to experience it themselves.
Yeah.
So the way you see money, if you're born in the Great Depression, is completely different than if you're born in a prospering society and prospering country at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, you might have more of an abundance mindset than they would, where they'd have more of a poverty mindset if they were born in that time, and that affects their financial decisions their entire life if they don't necessarily address it.
Correct.
And so, I'm like, okay, it's cool that I'm kind of born in a time where it is a little bit more of an abundance mindset,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also not to become complacent and just think that like nothing can go wrong, sort of thing.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, that's great.
But just like having the balance of like, I don't really know how to say it. It's like a balance, or it's like he says it, he's like an appetite for nuance.
Yeah,
it's like,
it's a great quote.
I want to have the appetite for nuance, and I want to be able to, learn all the sides of the argument and then come to like a very educated based conclusion.
Yeah.
And how I can best serve people, because like I know that being in a situation where like you're financially not okay, or you're scared that you're not financially okay, and you have a family that you want to take care of, like that's a very stressful situation.
Yeah.
And it's not fun to be there.
Right.
Nor is it healthy for a family to be there. Right. And so if there is an opportunity for somebody to come to me and me to offer them like some education and so a few different avenues that they could take where it could completely change their life.
Yep.
For the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
And their family's life, and set up their next generations, that's something I'm like, okay, that's pretty sweet, like,
right.
I have the opportunity to bless a family and love on people,
mm-hmm.
regardless of if they give me their business or not. It's like,
sure.
If I'm in a conversation with them, I'm just going to be genuine, transparent, and honest with them,
mm-hmm.
and do my best to serve them well.
Right.
And I can attribute that just to like growing up in ministry, you guys, how you raised us, and just the people that God has surrounded me with and I've been blessed to walk with.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's the kind of, I don't know, what is this, stigma or something towards a younger advisor. It's like, what the heck does he know?
Yeah.
And I think it brings immense value when you and I are able to like tag team.
Yeah.
And like bring viewpoints and stuff together.
I agree.
Yeah. I think it's super powerful.
Me too.
I probably missed a few things in there that I want to say, but that's kind of like a general.
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll do another episode at some point.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that works. That works.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other?
Yeah. I mean, we could go a lot of different places, but I guess just as like a final like end cap.
Okay.
Before we in further episodes get into like the nitty gritty and some like really cool topics that I'm super excited to cover. Like what are some basic financial decisions you can make that'll change your life?
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean to be patient and do the mundane things that will over time pay dividends?
Yep.
Dividends. We'll talk about those.
Yep. No pun intended.
Yes. We'll probably talk about those a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like different, investment strategies for different ages, like if you're going into retirement, depending on your situation, there's all sorts of things that you could do to help navigate you in that process. But then there's somebody like my age, it's like, okay, how do I start investing now to set myself up in the next 30, 40 years that will change my life, right?
I'm really excited.
Yeah.
In some of our future episodes where we're going to be able to not, people expect we'll talk about people who are nearing retirement. Yeah, we'll talk about all that stuff.
Yep.
But I can't wait to talk about too, here, families, here's what you can do with your little ones, your grandkids, your children, to begin teaching them healthy ways to approach, finance for themselves and getting them set up and to help them begin to think in very healthy ways about that, going into their future. I'm really excited about those things. And and like you said, the guests we're going to be able to bring in here to talk about certain topics. We already have, I think, some great ideas of who we could interview.
And it's not just going to be finance people
exactly.
either. Like we'll bring in all sorts of experts on all sorts of things.
Yep.
And kind of tied in. So
yeah, I think it's going to be exciting. And so yeah, I'm looking forward to going on this journey with you.
I'm excited.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's going to be a good thing.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we'll kind of wrap up there, but thanks for watching the Legacy Life podcast, everybody. They have the call to actions or whatever, feel free to subscribe, like, comment, share it with a friend. If you're like, I'm not sure this podcast is for me, but I do know somebody that might enjoy it, send it off to them. We're excited to go on this journey with you guys. You go.
Yeah. Or, if you watch this and you just had fun making fun of us, you're like, hey, these are two guys we really like to make fun of. Subscribe, watch us, and just continue
and comment and make fun of us.
Right.
Do that as well.
Yeah.
If you watch this for pure entertainment, go for it.
Right.
Go for it.
But we're looking forward to walking along this journey, not just together, but with all of you who do watch. And we thank you for your support. Thank you so much. And we'll catch you next time on the Legacy Life podcast.